Hello, let's find out what happens in Mr. Penguin and the Lost Treasure, Chapter 21. Let's get out of here. Mr. Penguin reached up behind him and, with all his might, wrenched the water pipe that had been sticking into his back off the wall. At the same time, he elbowed an alarm button by his flipper, and it started to scream like a baby. Hundreds of gallons of water sloshed out across the floor. The O'Houlihan brothers hadn't expected that. Rory O'Houlihan squealed a high-pitched squeal, dropped the sacks of treasure, and tried desperately to stop his feet from slipping out from under him. Brian O'Houlihan's face turned scarlet. "Pick up those bags, you silly guy," he yelled, "and let's get out of here." Rory did as he was told, and the two crooks began hoofing it across the slippery floor. Edith put two fingers to her lips and blew an ear-piercing whistle. Gordon launched himself off her head and headed straight for the thieves like an arrow. Screeching furiously, Gordon swooped and pecked at the brothers' ears and noses, diving into them over and over again until they were a blur of flying fists and feathers. "Get this stinking flying rat off of me," roared Brian over the noise, but Gordon didn't give up, and the two brothers stumbled and slid their way across the room. Mr. Penguin gave Colin the nod. The spider squared his jaw, leapt up, and kicked off from the wall. As he flew through the air, he shot out a long line of web from his bottom, throwing it so that the end knotted around a gas pipe running along the baseboard. Colin landed and pulled the web tight to create a nearly invisible string that stretched out across the room. Just at that moment, the two brothers came tumbling toward it, with Gordon flinging himself into their faces. They didn't see the tripwire until it was too late. They went crashing and skidding across the tiles, circling twice around the dinosaur skeleton before sliding to a stop. Mr. Penguin waddled calmly over to the panting brothers. When he reached the final bone of the dinosaur's tail, Mr. Penguin gave it a light push with his flipper, and the entire skeleton began to shake. As it wobbled above their heads, the two brothers tried desperately to get to their feet, but water was still gushing out of the pipe, mixing with all the dust in the room and covering the floor with a thick, slippery goo. It was useless. The crooks fell to the ground just as the skeleton broke loose from its supporting cables. It tumbled down on top of the squealing brothers, trapping them inside its ancient rib cage. When the dust settled, Mr. Penguin bent down to look through the bars of the skeletal prison. "Don't ever underestimate old ladies," laughed Edith Hedge. "Or penguins," cried Mr. Penguin. "Or Collins," said Collins Pad. Gordon didn't say anything. Inside the dinosaur, the prisoners bent their soggy heads in shame as the sound of sirens and screeching police cars, alerted by the ringing alarm, filled the air from the courtyard outside. That is the end of Chapter 21.